Hi everyone, I've already covered the build guide and the group gameplay guide for Witch Doctor, and now I'm going to show you what I use for pushing GR141 with my character right now. So the setup is a little bit special, and also the gameplay is a little bit different, so I want to go a little bit more into the details now compared to just the build guide. In order to survive, we have Grave Injustice resetting Spirit Walk, and usually you want to avoid killing anything when you're inside of Spirit Walk. You only want to do it outside so you actually get the reset proc on Spirit Walk, because this is really what keeps you alive most of the time. You have Ghost Trance for the regeneration, 5% per second is no joke, and you have Spirit Walk to avoid damage. And you have to see that health is a resource. Health is your DPS essentially in this build. This is also why I chose a lot of defensive options. I have a couple defensive passives. I have Vitality Gems, which you might never have seen before. But the thing is with Vitality Gems, you actually get more toughness out of Vitality Gems than Armor Gems. Generally, you want to stack a little bit of armor because that gives you more damage reduction than Auras. And because of that, I have actually crafted Strength Captain Crimson pieces. I augmented them with Strength. So I have like, I don't know, 3k or 3.5k Strength just to give additional armor. But also, instead of the gems in the chest and the pants, I put Vitality Gems. The thing is that the recovery also goes up as your toughness goes up. Since most of the healing comes from Ghost Trance and also the Blood Ritual passive, giving you a flat percent life regen, you don't really heal much with your regular life per second or your life per hit. Initially, I recommended life per hit in my guide, but I realized that this is actually not really a good way to heal up anymore, because you really have to get the timings right on the Phantasms, and you can't just spam everything as much as you want, because then you will kill too many targets and you will not be able to accumulate a lot of damage. So because of this, it's very important to stack toughness a lot. I have 7.5k vitality on my Paragon 2700 Witch Doctor, and this kind of makes it comfortable. It's not really I'm super invincible, I'm not super tanky, but I can survive just fine, and with the right timing on Spirit Walk and so on, it works. This is also the main reason why we see these really high clears on non-season, where the Witch Doctor goes significantly higher with higher Paragon, because you stack up so much survivability, so much toughness, that essentially you can keep your Endless Walk to close to 100% damage bonus all the time. You can stand close to the enemies, you can accumulate whenever you want, and it just makes the build work better overall when you're surviving more. But don't let yourself be fooled, this is something very specific to Witch Doctor, so generally don't put Vitality Gems in a gear. This is just something very specific because of the life regen mechanics. And other builds also need to stack recovery, so you kind of have to find a balance between toughness and recovery. But here, recovery goes up as your toughness goes up in almost 100% linear way. There's a few other things that are also changed about the Witch Doctor setup, and one is the Blood Ritual passive. You get 1% life regen from this, which is very nice. It basically gives you 20% more recovery. And on top of that, you get 20% resource cost reduction. The tooltip is actually misleading here. It adds a flat 20% resource cost reduction, which combined with Captain Crimson's gives you 25% more toughness. This is very strong. It's like one of the better defensive passives, plus the regen, and you also can cast everything more easily. And because you have so much resource cost reduction with the Captain Crimson, with this passive, you don't really need Rush of Essence. So you can drop Rush of Essence for this passive essentially. But you also have to take the Spirit is Willing rune on Spirit Barrage. So you might wonder why not Money 2, and the reason is that it's actually not really so good. So I tested this a bit, and the results suggest that Money 2 is just roughly around 20 to 30% stronger on single target than Spirit is Willing. And this is not very much, considering you have the Gazing Demise offhand that buffs Money 2 a fuck ton, but Money 2 itself is just so weak that even with this huge buff on Gazing Demise, it doesn't really add up to being that strong on single target. And Money 2 is mainly there to kill the boss for you. It doesn't do anything in the Rift. So I decided to take Spirit is Willing, because that gives you all the mana you need if you're a little bit careful and not spam Locust Storm too much. And you can take one other passive. So the passive I chose instead of Rush of Essence in that case is Confidence Ritual. Confidence Ritual is 25% multiplicative damage boost while you're standing close to a target. And generally you can keep this up most of the time unless the Oculus rings spawn really far away. And even on most bosses, you can usually stand relatively close because you can survive a hit or two in most bosses. And sometimes you can hide behind your Templar a bit and so on. And with this Confidence Ritual passive, the DPS you do with Money 2 and no passive versus Spirit is Willing and the passive is actually extremely close. So you do get roughly the same damage on the Rift Guardian, maybe slightly less, and you get a lot more damage during the rift, and this helps you to push a little bit higher. Also, in order to make all of this work, I had to drop Spirit Vessel. Spirit Vessel is not really required once you reach like a certain level of proficiency with the build and a certain level of toughness. I don't really die very much unless it's a really, really bad rift, or I have, you know, like Vortex, Arcane, Fire Chains Elite or something, and there's like 3 other packs that crowd control me and fear me, something like that. But generally, if you manage your defenses right, if you manage your Spirit Walk right, you will be fine. And I very rarely die unless I play extremely aggressively. Obviously, this requires, you know, that you know the build pretty well, and maybe early on you should try to go with Spirit Vessel, simply to learn the build better. And once you're comfortable with, you know, surviving even tough situations, I would definitely drop Spirit Vessel. In this case, for less experienced players, I would recommend dropping Confidence Ritual for Spirit Vessel, because if you're not really pushing to the absolute highest tiers, like 140 plus, then you don't really need the DPS necessarily. So just go for the defensive option, and it's much better to, you know, not die all the time than to have a little bit of damage. We also have the Swamplanted Human passive. This gives you the resistances of the same damage types that you deal as a Witch Doctor, which means cold, fire, physical, poison. So you're very weak to Arcane and Lightning. So you want to stack some of that resistance on your items, preferably, you know, from Captain Crimson. You can craft that easily. And, you know, whatever else you can get. A little bit of, especially Lightning Rest is quite good. Arcane Rest is usually not that important, but it helps you to actually just walk through an Arcane Beam quickly when, you know, one is coming and you don't have Spirit Walk up. So having a little bit of that also helps. And now about mana regen and resource cost reduction. Because the Spirit is willing, you don't have infinite resource like you usually do with Rush of Essence. So you have to manage your mana a little bit better, but it's fine as long as you don't overly spam your Locust Swarm or your Piranhas. With the resource cost reduction I get from Captain Crimson's, the Blood Ritual, and I also have it on the shoulders, I'm perfectly fine with mana, and you know, you can build around that. Resource cost reduction is actually the next best stat after cooldown reduction on the shoulders, so you definitely want to get that. Also, a lot of people ask me about attack speed breakpoints and if they should roll it. And the answer is yes, you should. And there's one really good breakpoint, which is 7% attack speed on a weapon and 2 7% attack speed items. Like a glove, I have it on gloves, and also a ring. So like this, you perfectly hit a breakpoint at 23 frames per attack, which is one of the better breakpoints. So if you haven't seen the in-depth guide yet, basically you don't want to go beyond 21 frames per attack. So you don't want to go faster, because then when you spam Spirit Barrage, you will actually lose a tick of Phantasms. So up to 21 is fine, so stacking a little bit more attack speed is okay. But you get a really nice breakpoint where you have basically the most value out of your items by having 7% weapon and 2 times 7%. If you can not reach it, you know, just by a little margin, you can use Enchantress to give you the extra 3% attack speed. She has the aura that buffs you a bit, and you can, you know, kind of cheat your way out of having bad items. The attack speed breakpoint required is 2.07, and you can check which breakpoint you have in the free planner. So import your character with all your gear and so on, and then you'll see. Keep in mind that attack speed on a weapon is not the same as on a ring or gloves and so on. It works a little bit differently on a weapon because it buffs the base attack speed of the weapon. It's basically a multiplier to all your other attack speed. So when you lose 1 or 2% attack speed on a weapon, you generally have to compensate that with a little bit more on your other items. Concerning cooldown rolls on your items, cooldown is extremely nice in solo for survival, but it's not really the best DPS stat. It's alright, but other DPS stats are a little better, so this is kind of up to you. You have to understand, you know, how much you need and how well you can survive on your own with Spirit Walk and so on, with the cooldown values you have. Generally, you want to stack cooldown where you can, especially the shoulders, probably the offense, maybe a ring or something. But I actually don't really want that much cooldown because I have these attack speed rolls and I learned how to play around what I have. You just have to know that, you know, depending on where exactly you are with your cooldown rolls, like an 8% roll is something like 2.5 to 3.5% DPS because of Captain Crimson's. So this is generally like half of the value of something like an attack speed roll or an average damage roll in a ring or something like that. But you do have the added value of having, you know, more cooldowns, more uptime. Also on the boss, you don't get Grave Injustice procs generally, so you have better voodoo uptime on the boss as well, which might help you to survive. Other than that, most of the other item rolls are quite straightforward. You stack crit, you stack Spirit Barrage, you stack defense wherever you can. Cold damage on the braces at least. On the amulet, it's kind of depending on your paragon. The thing is that cold damage is the same category as Mask of Jerem. So for your Phantasms, you actually have a lot of damage already from the Mask of Jerem, and adding 20% cold is not doing all that much. So especially on lower end Paragon, intelligence is just fine. You can also go with attack speed, you can go with cooldown, you can go with average damage on the amulet. All of this kind of works. Cold damage will give you a little bit more DPS on Rift Guardian because your spirit is willing or your Mind 2 is getting buffed as well. I also linked my own character with the free planner in the description, so check it out to see exactly the roles. I have really good gear. I have pretty much the perfect stats on every slot, besides like a ring that has intelligence, and everything else is really, really good. So you have kind of like a benchmark to see, where you're going. One last thing to discuss is Locust Swarm Pestilence versus Locust Swarm Cloud of Insects. Cloud of Insects is a very strong defensive buff, but it only works when you have Creeping Death as a passive. And since I want to use all the other passives, I decided to drop it. And I also tested this a bit, and it seems like Cloud of Insects simply takes too long to spread to every target, even if you cast like 4 or 5 times on a big pull. Like, you do get Ring of Emptiness effect quite fast on most targets, but you don't get it on everything pretty much at once. While Pestilence, it needs like 3 seconds or 4 seconds. If you do 2 casts, it's gonna spread to everything really quickly. You just have to recast with Pestilence, every 8 seconds to make sure you keep up the Ring of Emptiness effect, but you can use another passive as well. So this is kind of playable in both ways, but for the really fast pulls, the big pulls, Pestilence wins out a little bit DPS wise. It's not very much. I'd say the overall DPS loss on a big pull is something like 5 to 10%, but it is there, and yeah, it depends kind of on what you want to do, but I chose Pestilence. Okay, this is for the setup. Now to the gameplay. First of all, you have to see that in solo, there's no one else to help you out with grouping enemies and surviving. So you have to do all of this on your own. So this is the main reason why you have piranhas, and you have to use it very strategically to put enemies on top of your phantasms. Also, you have to see that there's no convention of elements in this build. So you're not doing this 16-second cycle that you usually do in groups, for example, but instead you cycle around Oculus Rings. Oculus Rings last 7 seconds. And generally you want to stand in them as much as possible to accumulate as much damage as possible. But there's also the problem that sometimes you might kill too many targets when you try to spawn Oculus Rings. So basically what you want to do is you dot everything up with Locust Swarm and put down 3 Phantasms on the ground, and then get in position, try to keep your Endless Walk stacks to as high as possible, and you try to kill exactly 1 target for Oculus Rings. This is very similar in group and solo, but here you basically always jump from Oculus Ring to Oculus Ring, and then whenever it runs out, you pop your Phantasms, and then you go to the next one. Occasionally, you can go for the full 10 seconds duration of Phantasms and just let them run out. I do it sometimes when I have a really big pull, and I know that most of the stuff is gonna die when I explode one of the Phantasms. So I try to squeeze a little bit out of the pull before exploding everything, and it's not really worth to kill like half the pull just to get an Oculus Ring. You want to kill only a few targets. So the best way to do this is to just spam Phantasms and keep exploding them with like 1 or 2 seconds of accumulation to do very little damage until something dies, and then run into Oculus Ring. And then as soon as the first pull is done and the first explosion happens, then you have to decide, do you want to move on? Do you still have enough targets? You have to see that you multiply damage per target in your Phantasms. So when you kill a lot of them off, you will not deal any damage anymore. You will not kill any elites. You will never kill any single target ever. This is also why the Rift Guardian takes so long. For 141, I need around 5.5 minutes for a single target boss on my Witch Doctor right now. And this is with attack speed rolls on my items and so on for stricken stacking. So it's really terrible. And I don't know, even the good bosses will probably be like at least 3 minutes. I've never met them yet, so I don't know. But I assume that something like Hamilton and Saxus could die in such a time. But for the most part, the single target bosses don't die. You will never kill elites, and this is just what you have to deal with. If you want to kill any kind of elites, you have to do this in a big pull. You have to drag them along, or you have to get a Cornet to finish them off. It's really important that you do not waste your time on small pulls. As soon as most of the stuff is dead, just move on, try to kite it along, and then do another big pull. Something like that is like fewer than 10 targets is not good enough. Like this, the build is designed around incredibly big pulls. The damage comes from the density, and more than any other build, more than any area damage build, this requires density. This does not mean that you necessarily only have to go for the really good maps. Generally, for fishing, you want to go for Festing Woods or Battlefields maps, or maybe Silver Spire, but you can actually make really good progress on bad floors with good monster types. So you want the small stuff, you want the zombies, you want the scavengers, you want the skeletons, you want, you know, this kind of stuff. And, you know, everything that basically fits into your Pyranado. And like this, you can do like some massive pulls to try to get an elite in and just, you know, pop them. Right now in 141, it takes a really long time for me to finish any elites. And the higher you go, the more you can feel that. But, you know, when I went for my 136 gear, for example, I was like one-shotting blue packs sometimes, simply because it's so easy to finish off any elites when you have a big pull. And then, you know, as you go higher tiers, it's becoming harder and harder. Then, you know, instead of one pull, I need like 5 pulls to finish a blue and so on. Generally, you don't really fight yellows. You should ignore them for the most part. So you mainly kill blues, and only those that you can actually get into the Pyrenados. And if they don't come in, or if, you know, it's like some kind of like ranged monster, or they teleport around and so on, then you usually just ignore them and move on. Don't waste your time and just kill trash. This is usually fine until you find like a map where, you know, you might get a convert, or you might have, you know, good elites that you can actually finish. Also in the boss fights, you can spam Spirit Barrage pretty much all the time. It's actually a pretty good solution because it gives you stricken stacks, and you have generally a pretty decent breakpoint in solo to just spam it, and you'll be fine with, you know, no ticks lost or anything. Just keep in mind you have to recast your Locust Swarm every 8 seconds on a single target. So you don't want to just mindlessly spam Spirit Barrage, because your Locust Swarm will drop without creeping death. When you're fighting bosses, make sure you do not die. Dying is really the worst thing you can do on a boss, because usually it's only one target and it takes forever to get your Soul Harvester stacks up again. Without that, you're completely squishy, you're getting one-shot by everything. So also, like at the Stardust Rift, you want to Spirit Walk into a pack, get your Soul Harvester stacks up, so that you have the necessary tankiness to actually survive anything. The Soul Harvester stacks, when they drop, you lose like 80% of your toughness or so. It's basically a band of mind for a Witch Doctor. One neat addition to the whole setup is my Templar. I have the Templar. I put down all the life region stuff and so on, the heals for him to help me out a bit. And I also gave him some items to CC the Rift Guardians, because the Rift Guardian fights are really long, they're really bad, and you want to maximize DPS there. So I gave him an Azure Wrath with lightning damage reroll. Like this, you can use the Word Ward to stun them and freeze them. And with the over energy trap, you get pretty good uptime of those CC effects. And of course, I have the Oculus Ring. So this is very nice, and you should definitely use something similar. I recommend that, because on the high tiers, the Rift Guardian is really the biggest issue. And that's about it for this guide. I hope you liked it, and I hope you learned everything you need for solo push. I pretty much covered everything that I can share, and I hope it's going to help you. Just one last thing I want to mention quickly. I do get a lot of questions about the solo speed farming setup for Witch Doctor, and I will try this a little bit more in detail. But right now, I don't really think there's really much you can do. So aside from dropping really core items like Ring of Emptiness or Sacred Harvester or something, you can't really fit in a lot of like speed stuff in the Witch Doctor. So you can do like, you know, slower runs and higher runs than other classes, maybe like 105s, 110s, but it will be, you know, like a little bit slower, not like those typical 2-3 minute runs. Probably you want to aim for something like 4 or 5 minutes or so. So I hope you liked the video, and I'll see you guys next time.